Hello YouTube, this is Eli, the OBD Tech. I'm here working on a 2006 Chrysler PT Cruiser with the 2.4 liter engine, non-turbo. On this video, I'm going to show you, how to troubleshoot a P0522 engine code. Pretty much is a engine oil pressure sensor circuit low. I'm going to describe the operation of this circuit and how to go about doing voltage checks and ohm checks. This vehicle pretty much has an intermittent oil warning light that sometimes comes on during the initial cold startup or comes on after a long drive of 30 minutes or so, but during a second key cycle. In other words, if you go from point A to point B, the light remains off, but after you shut down and you come back and turn the vehicle on, the light turns on and stays on during the drive cycle until you turn it off, and maybe on the third or fourth or so on cycles it turns off. But this condition doesn't happen all the time, but it happens during those two conditions, either cold startup or after a long drive of 30 minutes or so, it will turn on, but after a second key cycle. Alrighty, so the first step to this troubleshooting is to identify the circuit design by checking the wiring diagram on this vehicle. Alrighty, guys. Alright, guys. So here's the wiring diagram for this oil pressure switch. As you can see, it has basically one wire, and the other wire is pretty much ground, which will be the housing of the oil pressure switch. So the one wire, as you can see, it's a gray color, which is a signal wire. This wire could be anywhere from 5 to 12 volts. And the way to identify this circuit, if it's a pull up or pull down design, is to basically look at the switch and follow the wire that doesn't go to the computer. In this case, it's the wire that doesn't go to the computer is pretty much the ground, which is the housing of this pressure switch. So if it goes to ground, then the circuit is a pull down design. If it goes to power, then the circuit is a pull up design. So for this circuit, as you can see, it's the wire that doesn't go to the computer, it's ground. So this is going to be a pull down design circuit. Alright, so the next thing I'm going to show you guys, which I did right here on a piece of paper, I wrote down some details about the circuit. Like I said, it's a pull down circuit design. The signal voltage to the switch is internally sourced by the PCM. And now, okay, on figure 1, as you can see, with the switch open, signal voltage remains high. As you can see, with the signal wire contacts open, our signal wire should read about 12 volts. Anywhere from 5 to 12 volts, depends on the circuit. But in this case, we're going to put down 12 volts, and on ground it should read about 0 volts. Now, with the switch closed, the signal voltage gets pulled to ground. So on figure 2, as you can see, with the contacts closed, our reading should be 0 volts on the signal wire and 0 volts on the other wire. So on any pull down design with the switch open, our readings will always be 0 and 12, or depending on the circuit design of the voltage. And on when it's a closed circuit, our voltage will always read 0 and 0, and that's on a pull down circuit design. And I also wrote down that on a closed circuit, it equals 0 volts, means no pressure on the engine. When it's an open circuit, it equals 12 volts. It means there's oil pressure in the system. Now, I'm going to read the operation of this circuit of this on these PT Cruisers. Alright, so it says that the oil pressure switch is normally closed. The switch changes from a closed circuit to an open circuit on increasing pressure of 7 psi. The oil pressure switch changes from an open circuit to a closed circuit on decreasing pressure between 2 and 4 psi. Alright, so on a P0522 oil pressure sensor circuit low, the conditions when it gets monitored is with the ignition on, engine not running, and voltage of battery above 10.4 volts. Set condition: the oil pressure switch voltage at the PCM goes above 4 plus volts for about 25 milliseconds. So anytime pretty much anytime the ignition is on with the engine off, the computer goes through a little test mode for about 25 milliseconds. So if the computer sees that the voltage on the pressure switch is above 4 volts, it's going to trigger out, it's pretty much going to trigger an oil warning light and also trigger a P0522 code. Alright, so the next steps is to pretty much go out there and show you guys the voltage checks on the oil pressure switch. So like I said, this is a normally closed circuit. So with the key on, engine off, our reading should be approximately on both ends 0 volts. On the ground side and on the signal wire about 0 volts. But when the contact's open, our voltage should be approximately 12 volts on the signal wire and 0 volts on the ground wire. So I'm going to go out there and show you these voltage with the key on, engine off, and then I'm going to also show you that once I turn the vehicle on, that 0 volt condition is going to jump to approximately battery voltage anywhere from 12 volts or higher, depending what the voltage it is when once the alternator kicks in and starts charging the battery. So our key condition here is with the key off, engine off, our reading should read about approximately 0 volts. But when the engine turns on, our circuit will go from a closed condition to an open circuit, which is going to make our voltage go from 0 to 12 volts on the signal wire. And then on these Chrysler PT Cruisers, normally after a shutdown, after 90 seconds, the pressure inside the oil pressure sensor, it should actually bleed off and go from an open circuit to a closed circuit and drop the whatever 12 volts should drop to approximately 0 volts again. And that's a good indication that the circuit is working good and the sensor is working. So let's go out there and do these checks. Alright guys, so as you can see, I have my voltmeter already connected. I have the black lead connected to the battery negative post, as you can see. And then I have my positive lead connected to the signal wire on the harness connector to the oil pressure switch. I'm not going to show you the location of the pressure switch. It's basically located in the rear of the block. It has a light green connector connected to it. So right now with the key on, with the key off, completely off, it's showing approximately 0.01. So the next step I'm going to do, I'm going to turn the key on, engine off, and this voltage should read approximately 0 volts. Remember, this is a normally closed switch. So on the pull down design, our voltage should read approximately 0 volts. So that's the next step. Alright, so with the key on, engine off, our voltage is approximately 0.12 volts, which is a good sign. Remember, on the normally closed switch, this voltage should be approximately 0 volts. So as you can see, it's 0.12. So the next step I'm going to do, I'm going to unplug the connector, and this voltage should jump to approximately 12 volts, which is battery voltage. Alright, so that's the next step. Alright, so with the connector unplugged, the voltage went from 0.12 volts to approximately battery voltage 11.56. Means the battery is a little bit low. But that's the, so that's the condition on a pull down design, that on with the connector connected, the key on, engine off, our voltage should be reading approximately 0 volts on the signal wire, and once you unplug it, it should jump to approximately battery voltage. In this case, this happened. Alright, so the next step I'm going to do is plug in the connector back into the oil pressure switch, and then start the engine. And this, remember, when there's pressure on it, this circuit becomes close to an open circuit. So it means that the contacts have opened up, and this voltage should remain approximately 12 volts. Alrighty. Alright, so the connector is already connected back into the oil switch sensor. So the next thing is to start the engine. This PT Cruiser is actually a stick shift, so make sure to have your parking brake on. So as you can see right now, with the key on, engine off, there is no engine oil light on. So let's start the engine and see if we produce an intermittent fault right here. So with the engine on, there's no oil warning light on. It means that that's good. So let's go out there and watch our voltage. So right now it's showing approximately 13.28 volts on the signal wire, but this is with the engine running, and there's actually pressure in the engine, so it means that the contacts on the oil pressure switch have opened up, which is a good sign. So the next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to rev the engine to apply some engine load to see if we can create some type of a glitch on this oil pressure switch. So here's the throttle plate. I'm going to snap the throttle while watching the voltage. So here we go. I'm watching for any glitches. Since this problem is an intermittent problem, so far it's looking good. Alright, so the next step, I'm going to shut the vehicle off. And remember, on these Chrysler PT Cruisers, it takes about 90 seconds for the oil to bleed off the sensor. So with the key on, engine off, our signal should remain approximately battery voltage, but after 90 seconds, the voltage should drop approximately 0 volts. And if it doesn't, that means that we have probably created the intermittent problem. That means that the sensor contacts are stuck open. Alrighty, so the next step is to turn the engine off and then watch our voltage. And hopefully after 90 seconds, this battery voltage goes back to approximately 0 volts. Alright, so with the key on, engine off, our signal wire is showing about 12.38, but it's, as you can see, as the seconds go by, it's actually going lower and lower. So after 90 seconds, this voltage should drop to approximately 0 volts. And if it doesn't, that means that the contacts have stuck open and it's not able to drop to 0 volts. So that means that we have created that intermittent problem on this oil pressure switch. So far looking good. Little by little it's dropping. So after 90 seconds, this voltage should drop to approximately 0 volts. So as you see, I'm not sure if you saw the glitch. The voltage did drop, and then for a snap second, it went back to 12 volts. So we did see, for an instant moment, we did see that glitch that the customer is talking about. the intermittent glitch on this oil pressure switch. I'm pretty sure you guys saw that the voltage did drop. Then for an instant second it went back to 12 and it dropped back to 0. So I'm pretty sure that's the intermittent problem that this vehicle is having. So the next step I'm going to do is go back to the vehicle and start the engine to see if we capture that intermittent problem with the oil light turning on. Alrighty. So I'm going to start the engine now. This is now with the key on engine off. I still don't see an oil pressure switch light on, but I'm going to start the engine now. Still, this is with the engine on. So far, it looks good. But during that initial shutdown, we saw that little glitch just for that split second where the voltage dropped and then went back to 12 and it dropped back to 0. So luckily that glitch didn't stay on for longer, because then, or else, I would have probably shown you guys that if the voltage would have dropped back to 0 and then went back to 12 and stayed there constantly, a steady 12, then I would have came back to the vehicle, turned the vehicle on, and this oil light should have turned on, showing that intermittent fault on this oil pressure switch. Means the contacts got stuck open. Alright, so I'm going to turn the engine off. So I'm going to go back and show you guys to see if we could capture that glitch once again. Oops, I forgot to leave the key on. Alright. So this is with the key on engine off, our voltage is approximately 12.01. So after 90 seconds, this voltage should drop back to 0 volts. So hopefully we're able to capture that glitch once again, and hopefully the voltage drops and then goes back to 12 and stays at 12, so we could see that glitch, the intermittent problem, and then hopefully we're able to capture that oil light. So it dropped after 90 seconds. It dropped back to 0. It means when this happens, it means that the circuit is working good. It means the signal in the oil pressure switch is in good condition, which is a good sign.
What you working on today?
Alright guys, so this last step that I'm going to show you guys, which I'm going to perform, it's called a circuit integrity test by using a test light. And I'm going to use I'm basically going to do a bypass test by connecting the test light to good working negative, which is on this vehicle. It has a negative jump start attachment, which is right here on this bolt and screw. But make sure that you touch the battery positive to make sure that the light is actually working. In this case, our light turned on, which is a good ground. So to perform this integrity test on the signal wire from the connector to the PCM, you must unplug the connector and touch the signal wire on and off. So in this case, my connector is already unplugged from the oil pressure switch. It's showing about 11.47 unplugged. So I'm gonna touch that this red lead on and off, and this voltage should drop to approximately 0 volts. And if that happens, it means that this signal wire from the connector to the computer basically is telling you that there's no shorts or opens. Alright, so I'm going to do that. And you can see it dropped to approximately 0.25. Touch it one more time. Approximately 0 volts. Back to battery voltage one more time. So 0.18. So that means the circuit integrity from the connector to the PCM, it's in good condition. There's no opens or shorts, and this pretty much tells you that the problem lies with the faulty oil pressure switch. But in this case, this oil pressure switch, it has an intermittent problem so during a cold startup, it may trigger an oil light, or during a long drive of 30 minutes or so, it may also trigger an engine oil light, but that's after a second key cycle. So pretty much, I'm going to go ahead and replace this oil pressure switch, since the customer is requesting to get it replaced no matter what. But hopefully these process that I did help you out. So once I remove the oil pressure switch, I will still perform some ohm tests. I'm going to compare the old to the new, just to give you guys some specs on the ohms, on the resistance of this oil pressure switch. All right, so that's the next step. All right, guys. So I have the oil pressure switch removed from the vehicle, and I also have the new one here. It's the Wells Vehicle Electronics oil pressure switch, part number 1S6670, and I got it from, actually, the customer got it from Amazon. Alrighty, so the next step I'm gonna do, I'm gonna do the ohm test, the resistance checks on both sensors. I'm gonna compare the old to the new. So I have the red lead already connected to the pin inside the connector, and then I'm gonna touch the black lead on the outside housing of this pressure switch. So actually, the specs for this Chrysler's, this PT Cruiser, is actually 5 ohms or less. Anything above 5 ohms is considered a faulty oil pressure switch. So here we go. I'm going to touch the housing, which is the ground. As you can see, it's about 4.7, 4.8 ohms, which is in the borderline of 5 ohms or less. So this is pretty much the reason why we're getting the intermittent fault on this vehicle, with this oil light turning on at certain conditions. So I'm gonna compare the new one now. I'm gonna connect the red lead inside that one pin, and like I said, I'm gonna touch the housing, which is the ground for this sensor switch. And as you can see, our ohms for this new pressure switch, it's about 1 ohm. It's a big difference from 4.7 to 1 ohm. So that means by installing this new pressure switch, this is going to solve the problem that this customer is having with an oil light coming on at random times, pretty much during, like I said earlier, during a cold startup or during a long drive, and on the second key cycle the light comes on. So this is pretty much the ohm readings compared from a new to an old, and we saw that the old one is pretty much on the borderline of 5 ohms or less. So hopefully this video helps any PT Cruiser drivers out there that are having this problem here. So this is Eli the OBD Tech. Subscribe if you like.